Hello, everybody.
Hello, Rabbi.
All right.
Hello.
Hello,
Okay.
everybody.
All right. So we have an important order of business to start with. It is Gilia's birthday.
Happy birthday, Gilia.
Thank you very
Happy
much.
birthday.
I know this was a little bit of a bummer, but not everything worked out that we planned.
Well, we can
But
celebrate for days. We'll give
yes, it will actually come turn out that way.
Now, was there
Thank
somebody
you,
else?
Rabbi.
Absolutely. Was there somebody else's birthday yesterday?
I don't know.
I thought there was somebody else yesterday or tomorrow. I don't know. Okay, but anyway, look,
I
hey,
think it
Mark,
was Mark Foreman.
oh, Mark Foreman's birthday is tomorrow.
I think it's today. I think what he said was, oh, and his birthday's the next day.
Oh, okay. All right. So tomorrow then. All right. So we'll have him tell. That's great. That's great. All right. Well, it's a popular time.
yeah,
So
Definitely January is the best month for birthday.
because
okay, okay. Marcus, when is yours? When was yours?
Last Monday.
Okay, I apologize for missing it.
Yeah, I'm a week before Gilia.
Okay.
well, belated happy birthday.
Indeed,
Thanks.
indeed.
Yeah,
All right. Well,
always
great.
take good wishes, right?
Always, always. Yeah, exactly. And and look, and we have I mean, look, I don't think any of the psalms are, bad psalms. We got a good one tonight. I mean, we got a good one to talk about.
Yeah.
So, this is going to be Psalm 30, which I imagine someone will recognize it pretty quickly. So, uh, as usual, before we start, I think we're pretty much at the very least for this month, February and March. I think we're pretty much every other week. I think that I think that's my sense of it. But anyway, so we shall. So I mean, obviously we'll let you know if there's anything that gets in the way of that. But other than that, we should be okay with this for the next few months in terms of like sort of regularity of it. Um, great. So why don't I just jump in? Let's see. All right. Number 30. Okay. I like to use the most recent translation if I can. And obviously we can compare them to other ones as we go along. Um, oh goodness. Yeah. Oh, okay. No, no, it's already the one that I want. So we're okay there. Let's set this up. Let's also just gonna play around with this for a moment. Sorry for any little mix up here. I want to get to. Okay, hold on. All right. Sorry, I don't know what you're seeing on the screen at the moment, but I hope that it's nothing too bad.
It's
Oh,
good. It's good.
Yeah.
okay, okay, that's all right.
Hmm.
no
Uh,
Psalm 30, English and Hebrew.
yeah, Psalm 30, English and Hebrew. All right, okay, yeah. Look, I was just so I have my so what I've been doing is I've been using the Kindle version of the altar Bible, which I need to kind of have hand in hand. So and anyway, like great to have everybody with us. I'm really very happy to have everybody here. And this is going to look pretty familiar if you are familiar with services. If you're not familiar with services, then we can, happy to go back and explain. But what we have is I'll do the first verse real quick. Mizmor Shir Chanukah Bayit LeDavid, right? which is a Psalm of David, a song for the dedication of the house. Okay, the house of David. What are we talking about here? Well, the understanding is that we are talking about the temple, which is a little strange because it depends on how you look at the Hebrew phrase, because Mizmor Shir Chanukat Habayit LeDavid, it would seem to be that it would be the house of David, but I don't think that that's the sense of it. And if it were the house of David, that would change the meaning a great deal, because, as you might imagine, the house of David oftentimes refers to the lineage of David. The lineage of David being a very important factor in um, in Judaism and in Christianity, frankly. The house of David being the one that will always have the kingship of Israel, according to God, according to the promise made in the second book of Samuel. And the idea is that the house of David is the house from which, or the descendants of David is from which you will get the Messiah. And then you could look at it as like, okay, well, no, I think they're talking about an actual house. Well, here's the thing. Who built the first temple?
Solomon.
Solomon.
Yeah, right. It wasn't David. And specifically, there's a whole part of the Bible that tells us why, like, the God says, no, David, you want to build it. No, you're a man of war. Sorry. Your kid's going to do it. Always just kicking things down the road to the next generation. Thanks a lot. No, I'm kidding. But in all seriousness, so if it were the house of David, then you may be talking about something different. You may be talking about maybe the palace of that where David actually lived, which is not nearly as important of a building, although it does. It is the location of his dalliance with Bathsheba and other people, but that's a whole other thing. The understanding is that it is the house, and that LeDavid is really a separate part of this. To say LeDavid means that this is a Davidic psalm meant for the dedication of the house, which you could then presume meant that maybe like you could imagine David. Again, we do not, I do not at least, subscribe to the idea that David wrote the Psalms. However, I do subscribe to the idea that it couldn't hurt to imagine David saying some things that wound up in the Psalms, or at least to, on a literary basis, kind of imagine it. So you could imagine potentially David saying to himself, okay, well, all right, if God's not going to let me build this great house, I'm going to at least write the theme music.
Oh, and I mean, it's obviously, I think from the story, I mean, David bringing the ark to Jerusalem, and so, I mean, it's obvious that he planned to build the temple.
Oh,
Of
yeah.
course, due to his actions, he wasn't allowed to. So I think it makes, I mean, perfect sense that, I mean, he already did the planning. Oh, how do you build the temple? How do you dedicate it? I mean, story-wise, I think it's perfectly fine to assign authorship of a psalm for the dedication of the temple to David.
Right. And by the way, you could also, I mean, and this is another suggestion I would have, is that, could you look at the temple as the house of David in a symbolic way? I think you absolutely can. I don't think, look, okay, because everything is baseball and baseball is everything. It's like Yankee Stadium, the house that Ruth built. I don't believe Babe Ruth was involved in the construction of Yankee Stadium, nor did he lay a single brick. I do know, however, that it was due to his incredible popularity and his heroic exploits on the field that allowed the Yankees to build this grand stadium. At least it was grand in 1923. This grand stadium, and also so that they could accommodate all the fans who desperately wanted to see Babe Ruth play. So, did Babe Ruth build it? Literally, no. Would it have been built without Babe Ruth? Likely not.
I'm probably wrong because I'm not an expert on this, but to me, when you were talking about royalty, the house sounds like the royal family, and talking about Babe Ruth, it talks about the Yankees, not the stadium. It's like trying to compare them to a royal house.
Sure. Absolutely, absolutely, and and being generally being not a Yankee fan, it's it's something that I kind of kind of acknowledge rather reluctantly. Although, of course, I mean, there's no doubt of their on-field success. Um, I want to read Alter's interpretation of "Song for the Dedication of the House." Um, he writes, the consensus of traditional interpreters is that the reference is to the temple. The literal sense of the Hebrew for temple is house of the sanctuary, or to a renovated altar or some other structure within it. Some scholars, noting the somewhat odd syntax of the superscription with psalm separated from for David, suspect that this entire phrase is an editorial interpolation not originally belonging to the psalm. Let me explain what that means. Oftentimes we have psalms that begin with Mizmor le David, a psalm of David, which is how the translation understands it. But now we have in this phrase Mizmor, Shir Chanukah Habayit le David. So the words Mizmor and Le David are separated by this, you could look at it as sort of parenthetical. So there's and oftentimes modern scholars like to suspect that these are, superscriptions, right? These are things that have been, these are ideas that have been added over, a phrase that was added later on by an editor, by a scribe, something like that. Let's see. I noticed a couple. We have a couple people who who maybe haven't been here for a while. I want to invite you to read. Susan, would you like to read?
Hi, Susan.
Hi. Sure.
Yeah. If you could do 2, 3, and 4.
Okay. I extol you, O Eternal One, for you have lifted me up and not let my enemies rejoice over me. O my eternal God, I cried out to you and you healed me. O Eternal One, you brought me up from Sheol, preserved me from going down into the pit.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah. Uh, so you have some relatively similar themes here, although obviously I want to focus on a couple of particulars. To lift one up, ki dilitani, this is in verse 2, you have lifted me up. The translation from Robert Alter is for you drew me up. And he comments the Hebrew verb dalo, where he got, which is where he got dilitani, is the one used for drawing water from a well. Death, then, is imagined as a deep pit from which the speaker has been drawn up by God. In this fashion, at its beginning, the poem announces itself as a Thanksgiving psalm, not Thanksgiving like the fourth Thursday in November, of course, but just a psalm of giving thanks. So, and that I would guess is that is sort of borne out by what we see in verse 4, that you brought me up from Sheol and preserve me from going down into the pit. not referencing the current HBO dramatic series. What we are talking about with the pit is an actual pit, but um, but the pit is understood to be this underworld, right? I know we're going to be talking pretty soon. For those who come to my Judaism 101, we're going to be talking pretty soon, at least in coming weeks, about the about Jewish views of afterlife, etc. And it is, of course, important and instructive to understand that the biblical view on the afterlife, for the most part, not in absolute terms, but for the most part, is a reference to an underworld where the basic thing that's happening is sleep. Not entirely unlike the underworld of Hades from Greek mythology. In other words, the biblical view of the Jewish afterlife is very limiting. So anyway, so this is essentially somebody who's saying, God, I cried out to you, as it says in verse 3, and you brought me up from this pit, from this, from you brought me up from, a potentially a near-death experience, if you will. Now, in Gilia's honor, as you used to live in the pit or Pittsburgh, which, by the way, is a very fine town. I'm not trying to say anything bad about it whatsoever.
It wasn't when it was snowy in the winter.
I'll bet. I'll bet. No, it really is a beautiful town.
Yeah. Now it is, yeah.
But I want to, kind of go into that with, in verse 4 about the description here. Alter says that the Masoretic text uses a form that does not correspond to biblical grammar, meaning miordi, gone down, going down. Several ancient versions, however, say instead of miordi, it's miorde, which means from those gone down. Now, what's the difference? Well, miorde is actually more grammatically correct, but as Alter then puts, highlights the idea that the speaker felt he had gone down to death. Yet of all who go down there, he alone was raised up. So, in other words, depending on how you read, this translation that you have in front of you leaves it relatively vague. From going down to the pit. In other words, who's going down? Is it one person who's going down, or is it a group of people who are going down, and then is only the one person being brought back up? In other words, is this a thank? Is the speaker thanking God for saving himself among many, or only speaking of an individual experience of which he was saved?
It reminds me a little bit of Joseph when he was thrown down into the pit. And Bor is a well, right?
That's one translation.
Yeah.
I mean, bore is it's a hole, or like a hole in the ground. I mean, so it's used in several different ways.
Different words in Hebrew?
I'm sorry?
Is it different word in Hebrew for this pit and the kind that Joseph was thrown in?
No, I believe bore is the word that's used. Now, and I unfortunately had the experience when I was taking Talmud class in high school, where we were learning from the tractate of Bava Metzia, which speaks of matters of laws of damages. And the example that's often given is, what does somebody, if somebody leaves a hole in, dug up in the ground and then, doesn't fill it in, and then your ox falls in it, somebody else's ox falls in it, what level of responsibility does the person who didn't fill the hole have for the owner of the ox? Now, an ox, at least the word that they use, and they use it other places too, is shore. And so we were in high school talking about the shore falling in the bore. And if as if that wasn't amusing enough, my teacher made the incredible mistake of beginning one of the classes with review questions, and he decided to begin the class by actually saying these words. All right, first question, what is a bore? And of course, inviting the high school students, one of the people in my class to, of course, say, this class, right? So it was a moment that I'm sure he would wish he could have taken back. Um, but
Raph,
yeah,
do we credit him or blame him for your love of puns?
I think I had the sickness way before, I'm afraid. At least a few years before. But thank you. No, it's anyway, so yeah, this is so that is the, to just revisit what you were asking. Well, yeah, I mean, bore is really kind of the standard biblical word describing that, and it does sort of shift in meaning depending on the context, whether it's a hole, whether it's a pit, whether it's a well. Any of those things are sort of, it's sort of understood in that kind of way.
If you fell in that and you were alive still, you definitely were dead when you got down there, because from what I understand, those wells were very deep. So.
100%. Yeah. I mean, and so, I mean, because sometimes when we think of, as was mentioned just a little bit ago about, Joseph being in, put in a pit by his brothers, you might say to yourself, okay, well, I mean, that's not great, obviously, but maybe we don't necessarily think about how dangerous that can potentially be, and how perilous of a moment this was. And really, I mean, Joseph had to deal with it a couple different times, because, I mean, there was when he was put there just before being sold into slavery, and then when he was imprisoned is also understood to be like a sort of an underground prison, if you will. So, I mean, Joseph spends a lot of time down below.
Rabbi,
Yeah,
in verse 3 where it says, you healed me,
yeah.
is he speaking of a physical healing, or is it more of a being delivered from what he's talking about in verse 4?
Very good question. And I mean, you can look at it a couple different ways, right? I mean, what kind of healing are we talking about? Are we talking about healing as one heals from maybe a somewhat pedestrian illness of some sort, or whether you're talking about, healing from, the verge of death? It's not, I mean, I think you could kind of look at it either way. The root of the word, vatirpaeni, you have within it the root resh pei aleph, which is the word we generally use for using for sickness and getting out of sickness. So yeah, so I mean, I think it's kind of depending on what you think happened, what the narrator is describing. Is he describing a near-death experience, an experience of actual death, of which he is revived? Is he talking about something that is more symbolic? Um, I don't know if it's, I think you could probably make, a different case for it depending on your point of view of it. All right. So, let's see. All right, Marianne, given your absence the last few months, I mean, I don't know what your excuse was, but okay, I guess it was, when you're below the equator, I guess you gotta, anyway,
Thank you.
but welcome back. Would you be willing to
Thank
read?
you.
Would you be willing to read 5, 6, 7?
I will. I can't. I don't see the number, so just stop me if I go too far.
Sure.
Oh, you faithful of God, sing out and praise that holy. Oop,
Sorry, my bad.
that's okay. And praise that holy name. For God is angry but a moment, and when pleased, there is life. One may lie down weeping at nightfall, but at dawn there are shouts of joy. When I was untroubled, I thought, I shall never be shaken.
Okay, great. Although, although if we, want to say that in verse 7 that this could be, maybe this is the opposite of the 007, because it was, because what he liked is martinis shaken and not stirred. So I shall never be shaken. I shall be stirred instead. No, I'm kidding. So, anyhow, um, okay. So what do we have here, right? Uh, so first, this is a conversation of deliverance, right? And then basically, the narrator in verse 5 is sort of turning to those listening potentially, or at least, imploring people to listen and to basically join with him, or her, obviously, join with them, to praise that name. And then we have a sort of an insight of God and God's patience or what have you, right? That you know uh, God's anger is brief, but when God is happy, it's everlasting. Um, and really, one of the most beautiful images that I can think of in the Psalms is right here, Villa Bokerina, that joy comes with the dawn. One may lie down weeping in nightfall, but joy comes with the dawn. Um, and I know I don't think this was widely published, but there was a book written of just like about I think it's like a like kind of a memoir of somebody's Jewish journey, and I think it was called "Joy Comes with the Morning" or "Joy Comes with the Dawn." It's um, and so it's kind of a lovely image, almost like the sun will come out tomorrow. That even when things are bad, there's always an opportunity for a new start. And then you have in verse 7 the idea that you know when times were good, I thought that they would last forever, right? And that's very relatable, right? We often think when things are good, why wouldn't it keep going, right? Why wouldn't we continue to have only good times? So it it's almost like, gosh, I almost took this for granted. um and in other words, maybe we shouldn't take this for granted so much. The good moments, we should not take those for granted. um it's often challenging to have that feeling of empathy when things are going great for someone. Sometimes that person has a hard time relating to people going through struggles, and it's important to remember to not fall into that. um so in other words, take it from the speaker, right? um there are times where you might think, I will never be shaken. um So let's see. Marcus, do you want to for your belated birthday? Could I have you do 8, 9, 10?
Okay. For you, O Eternal One, when you were pleased, made me firm as a mighty mountain. When you hid your face, I was terrified. I called to you, O Eternal One. To my sovereign, I made appeal. What is to be gained from my death, from my descent into the pit?
A little more.
Can you dust pray? Can dust praise you? Can it declare your faithfulness?
Okay, so I want to I do want to come back to that. Um, the the translation is a little I mean in verse 8 it's a little hard to translate it. This phrase leharri oz, um, to be, made me firm as a mighty mountain. Now, Alter translates this as you made me stand mountain strong, which kind of sounds like it's like a commercial for coffee, mountain strong from the mountains of Colombia. I don't know. It almost sounds like that. And even Alter, it acknowledges the translation that he has is only an educated guess because the sequence of words in the Hebrew is perplexing. Literally, this phrase would actually be, if you were taking it absolutely literally, you made stand my mountain of strength. That doesn't make any sense. So you made me stand mountain strong. In other words, it's like to stand as, to basically comparing one's strength to the strength of a mountain. That's essentially what we're going with.
Unmovable.
Yeah, and that's certainly understandable. It's just that the phrasing is just so
Mhm.
it's very awkward, just the phrasing. But I think the concept is, I think is an understandable one. Um, now now in verse 9, it's a little, just in terms of the structure of the psalm, right? It's like, I called to you, O Eternal One, to my sovereign I made appeal. Um, Alter comments these words through to the end of verse 11, in other words, this one, then the next two, appear to be self-quotation. The speaker, now rescued from death, recalls the words of desperate supplication that he addressed to God from his straits. In other words, this is what when I was at my worst, or when things seemed the most dire, this is what I said. I said the following, and then you have, verse 10, this idea of what is to be gained from my death, from my descent into the pit. Can dust praise you? Can it declare your faithfulness? Alter comments here that humanity cannot fulfill his vocation of celebrating God if he is engulfed by death. It is living human beings whom God needs to sing God's praises. It looks as though the giving of praise to God is imagined as a replacement of the pagan idea in which the sacrifices were thought of as food necessary to the gods. Um, so, so essentially, they're saying that you need me alive, like in other words, like the person in this psalm is appealing to God on a very practical level. In other words, God is really, if God is sort of needs our praise, well, you can't praise God if you're not here to do it. I know that, to state the obvious, right? I mean, but it's like, in other words, God needs living people to praise. And So instead of saying, okay, well, I should, sacrifice myself to God. No, 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 no. That's not what Judaism says. Judaism says we want you, if at all possible, to be living, to be with us, and to use that energy in life to sing God's praises.
Yeah.
And that's
We always, we always say that Judaism is a this worldly religion, right?
yeah.
Is a what now? What did you say?
A this worldly, like it's not
Yeah.
not the afterlife per se that's important as in Christianity, but what we do in this world, our deeds are important.
Yeah, yeah, and it's very and it's like basically saying, God, like, what good am I to you if I'm not in this world? So it's not only, I mean, it's both. In other words, like, God, keep me with you. It's a win-win, right? I get to live, and you get to hear the praises. It's a very practical way of looking at it, I think, and one that is sold to us as a winning idea, if you will. Um,
Yeah, I see Frank joined us tonight.
yeah, yeah, glad to have you, Frank.
Hey, Frank.
Thank you. Hello.
Yeah, Frank, I didn't want to, I wasn't going to call on you to read unless you want to.
Not yet.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Just glad to have you here and with us, and you know, and you know, you're just glad to have you. Period. So it's all good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, and at some point, Frank, you and I have to talk about Alex Bregman.
Yeah. Okay.
Frank and I are both Cubs fans, and the Cubs signed not only a really good player, but a one of the best Jewish baseball players of recent, maybe of all time. He's fantastic. So so plenty to celebrate there. So okay, so this is the beginning of it, basically beginning of um, the speaker trying to sell God on this idea. Listen, it benefits both of us to keep me going, right? And then the speech continues from there. And Gilia, if you would be so kind to read the last three verses.
All right. Hear, O Eternal One, and have mercy on me. O Eternal One, be my help. You turned my lament into dancing. You undid my sackcloth and girded me with joy, that my whole being might sing hymns to you endlessly. O my eternal God, I will praise you forever.
I mean, it's just a happy psalm, at least. I mean, I just and it's kind of, and it's nice to have that every here and there, because I mean, there's plenty to lament about. There is plenty to cry about, in every generation, and certainly day to day. And it's it's basically like, you turn my lament, my mourning into dancing, right? Um, Alter comments on verse 12, um, on the part about where undone by sackcloth and bound me with joy. Um, the general contrast for mourning and rejoicing, dirge and dance of the first part are focused concretely through the metaphor of clothing in the parallel of the second part. The garment of mourning is undone or removed, and joy becomes the new garment that God pulls tight or binds around the person that God has rescued. In other words, like, so to be girded with joy, meaning like literally my clothing is now joy. Um, and by the way, I mean, and you could, and whether or not the writer meant to put it this way, um, to literally be wearing joy may be another Joseph reference, right?
Mhm.
Because we have the reference of being in the pit and then reviving up, and then it's the and then and now wearing another a coat of literal joy. Um, and so you could almost imagine Joseph at the end of the Technicolor musical, right? Where I think the final lines of the actual musical may be like, "Bring me my colored coat," of Joseph, having uh, reunited with his family and living in prosperity again. Bring me my colored coat. Like, in other words, allow me to be girded with joy once again. Bring back that moment of innocence that I felt when it was first given to me. Um, this is, a Mise Morshir Chanakat Habayit LeDavid, but it could be of Joseph. Really could imagine Joseph having that as well. Um, Regarding the final verse, uh, so let me see. Yeah, the part, like the beginning of the verse here that's translated in what we have in front of us as that my whole being might sing hymns to you endlessly. It's more, the alter translation is, "Oh, let my heart hymn you, Hymn." And Alter comments, this translation, following one ancient Greek version, reads kevedi, which doesn't mean kavod. Kevedi means my liver. Okay, what in the world are we talking about? One of the organs for. Um, the liver is considered kind of the way, at least in the Bible, sometimes like the liver is kind of what we attribute, like the attributes are similar to that we usually use for the heart today. The heart being sort of the seat of emotion, the seat of, place of love, etc. And so there is an ancient Greek version that instead of saying kavod, it says kevedi, that my whole being might sing hymns of literally my liver, um, and but really meaning of my heart, right? Like I'm gonna sing from the heart, right? Um, the liver sort of being a more literal version of this, but like I'm gonna sing from the heart. Um, And Alter goes on to say, like many other Thanksgiving psalms, this one exhibits an envelope structure, beginning and ending with the declaration that the speaker will exalt God for the mercies granted. So this is a pretty, lovely, compact song. And it's, and again, I mean, it's uh, one of the happiest psalms that I can really think of. Um, and what's also important about it, the way we use it liturgically, is not only is it um, in the preliminary prayers. I mean, and it's actually one of the more popular of the preliminary prayers, I would say. In a in a typical morning worship service, um, the the preliminary prayers, the ones that you say before you get to actually Pesukei Zimra, um, there are certain ones that are, some people kind of look at them, some of them as kind of being optional, or at least, you could say them, you don't necessarily have to say them. This one's pretty popular. This one, like, not a lot of people omit this particular one, partially because it is so joyous, and but it has another function at a particular time of year. And I'm going to go back to the very beginning. Oh, well, I didn't want to go that far back. Okay, let's see. 27. Oh, for goodness sakes. Okay. All right, here we go. Going back to the very beginning. What time of year is recalled in this psalm? The answer is in the Hebrew.
Hanukkah?
Hanukkah, exactly. From the very first verse. Mizmor Shir Chanukat Habayit LeDavid, right? So
The clue's in the Hebrew, not the translation.
exactly, yeah, no, it very much is, and you know, and don't feel bad if you didn't catch
Well,
it.
it says dedication.
Right. So what is Hanukkah but dedication, and specifically a rededication, right? Of what exactly? What are we rededicating
The
during
temple.
Hanukkah? The temple, the house.
Right.
So whether or not this psalm predated Hanukkah, and I'm pretty sure it. I believe it did. It did actually
Oh, it must.
predate the holiday. It's just kind of it's a really, it just fits really, really well. So this has become sort of the unofficial psalm of Hanukkah. And in fact, there are those who, um, during the holiday of Hanukkah, that they go back and we reread this psalm in some services. We'll reread it, because it just, and it just, this idea of Chanukhat Habayit, of dedicating the house, or in the case of the holiday of Hanukkah, rededicating the house. Um, it works pretty well. Um, and but I think it really is happenstance. I mean, um, there aren't that many holidays that have that have an absolutely definitive link to a particular psalm. Shabbat has a very definitive link, right? I mean, Psalm 92, means more surely Yom HaShabbat, even though the psalm doesn't really have much to do with Shabbat itself, but it says it's the psalm for Shabbat. So, okay, fine. Um, but not a lot of holidays have a link to a psalm that really is that clear. And you know, uh, does it fit? Does the rest of the psalm fit Hanukkah? I gotta say that it does pretty well, right? Not letting my enemies rejoice over me. I mean, the struggle that the Maccabees face is one of it's a real battle. And and the idea that you're, um, you know, being, sort of in a near death experience, that's very much a part of the sort of the struggle of the war that the Maccabees fight. Um, so it's just kind of happenstance that it really works well for the holiday of Hanukkah.
Same
Um,
translation?
I'm sorry?
Is it translated the same way at Hanukkah?
I mean, yeah. I mean, in terms of like, of dedication, right? I mean, we don't often. I mean, I think Hanukkah, the word Hanukkah is so ubiquitous with the actual holiday that we, don't really. We have to like kind of remind ourselves, like, oh yeah, it means dedication. And uh, but I think, and I would say that Hanukkah is a holiday that in many ways is, um, I would say, uh, I think it's fair to say that Hanukkah is one of our more carefree holidays, if that makes sense. In which the joyousness of it seems to override other elements of it, right? I mean, listen, Passover is a very important holiday, obviously, and it's a joyous holiday, but there's all this talk about slavery and oppression and affliction, and we have to eat the bitter herbs, right? I mean, like I mean, the story of Hanukkah has to do with a struggle, but I mean, unless you count sour cream as bitter, which I do, but like is
So it's a good thing that we don't have the books of Maccabees and read them.
yeah, I think so. I mean, it's just the whole. I mean, just the rabbis hated the Maccabees so much. I mean, or at least the descendants of the Maccabees so much that they decided to kind of put a kibosh on including the books of the Maccabees. I actually did um in my previous pulpit, I actually did a two-part class on the books of the Maccabees because I just wanted to say like, hey, we never look at these. Um,
Maccabees 2 is quite gruesome.
yeah, it's right. I mean, and especially since it's a sequel, I mean, it's kind of no. I mean, actually, I mean, really, it's the two books of the Maccabees. I mean, what I remember from it off the top of my head is that it's one is kind of like a micro version of the story. The other one's kind of a macro version of the story. That they're not. It's not really part one and part two. It's just sort of two different approaches to the explanation of those events. Um, so yeah, I mean, we don't. So I would say that I think it's fair to say that Hanukkah is relatively carefree, right? I mean, there's not a lot of preparation you necessarily have to do for it. I mean, and what's the central thing? You light candles, it's nice, and you play with a spinning top, which gets kind of boring after a few minutes, but we didn't know that as kids.
Latkes and donuts.
Yeah, I mean, we eat like greasy, sugary foods. I mean, that sounds like a lot of fun.
And the focus of Hanukkah wasn't always on the Maccabees. In some periods of Jewish history, it was more on the miracle
Right.
of Hanukkah, of the light burning for 8 days, rather than the struggle that the Maccabees went through.
No question, no question. And yeah, I mean, we don't really. Yeah, I mean, there's just something kind of fun about that, and so it kind of goes to follow that. I mean, this almost sort of works with it because this is pretty happy. Yes, there is a gratitude for not falling into darker times, and there is a reference to some of the darkness, but I mean, but it's sort of like, hey, I got to avoid it. That's great, it's
That's
rather
actually
happy-go-lucky.
that's actually quite interesting. When I was at one point writing something about Hanukkah, and I came across this story. I don't know exactly where, somewhere in the Talmud, I can find it, where. And again, as you said, the rabbis didn't like the Maccabees, so they were trying to find other reasons why we celebrate at Hanukkah.
Yeah.
And one of the stories was actually um, Adam instituting the celebration of Hanukkah.
I did? Okay, no, sorry, different Adam. Yeah, okay, all right. Sorry. Okay.
So because he was just created, he didn't have experience what a year looks like. So he noticed that the days are getting shorter and shorter and darker. So he became afraid and thought it must be something he has done wrong. God is punishing him by making the days shorter and shorter and sending him into darkness. And then when the days started to get longer and longer again. So, and that's exactly when we celebrate Hanukkah. He
Exactly.
realized, oh, this is the way nature's supposed to be. This is how the world is supposed to be, and God is not angry with me. And then he celebrated by lighting candles.
I've always liked the stories of the Maccabee much better of the like two choices, if this you want to call it choices. But I mean, that's just my military background. But what caused the sort of the official shift to the Maccabees?
I think it was the realization that, I mean, that the rabbis who wanted to cast the Maccabees aside had an agenda. They had an agenda, and the fact that they were pushing this idea of a so-called miracle of the oil was really something they kind of made up. And so it's it's nice in the storybooks, and I'm not saying that it has no value, but it's a legend, right? It's not based on what actually happened. So I think that the story of the Maccabees has been, at least to an extent, reclaimed among among people, and I think I mean, also I would I don't, I can't speak of this with any particular authority, but I do have a memory of Hanukkah becoming more important at the time of the foundation of the state of Israel, in which those who those who began the state of Israel, those especially who fought, in the War of Independence and subsequent battles, um, you know, related a lot to the Maccabees. Here were soldiers willing to fight for their people, for their traditions, and willing to lay it all out on the battlefield. And it's, again, I have to check the sources on that, but that's a general sense that I seem to remember. And so that could have been, so it could be something that's, less than 100 years old in terms of that reclamation.
Well, when in 67, when they regained access to the wall, was anything about connection with Hanukkah and the rededication and that history connected with that, what happened in 67 when we regained the old city?
Yeah, I think that's quite possible. Again, I don't know for sure. But one thing that does come to mind is like the official seal of the state of Israel. It's a menorah. Now it's a seven branch menorah. It's not the nine branch menorah, but it's still a menorah. So I think there is at least something to follow up on. I want to, as always, be cognizant of everybody's time and appreciative of everybody coming in and spending the hour with us. We will go to Psalm 31, one of the most flavorful of the Psalms, in 31 flavors, right? So we will go to Psalm 31 when we have the next edition of this class 2 weeks from tonight at 6:30 p.m. And I'll look forward to seeing you here and in other spaces.
February 9th, right?
February 9th, right. And I'm in Knoxville, actually in person in between there. I will be there from this coming Friday through Thursday of the following week. So
how's the weather there?
the weather here is chilly, but I mean we've Charleston avoided some of the bad stuff, so a lot of the bad stuff. So yeah, I hope everybody is good and safe where you are. So
yeah, safe travels when you come here.
appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you.
If
Thank you,
someone
Rabbi.
is interested in this story that I just told about Adam, it's in Talmud Avodah Zarah 8a.
8A of Avodah Zarah. Okay. All right. Awesome. Great to see everybody here, and till next time.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
All right. Take care.